What happens when generative AI helps to manage your finances? In this latest installment of our oral history project, we meet Ryan Graciano, a co-founder of the personal finance company Credit Karma. Throughout this series, we'll be featuring the stories of breakthroughs and other key moments in emerging tech, as told by those who witnessed them. I'm Jennifer Strong, and this is Shift.
Now here on the steering column is a device called Auto Cruise. You simply set the speed you want.
Self-driving robo-taxis are already on the road in US cities.
As the disc rotates, a mirror reflects the light in the way that depends on how the signal was recorded.
This is the 100 terabyte. I present to you Electro, the Moto Man.
Ladies and gentlemen.
I would say that one of my greatest skills is my ability to interact with humans.
Because you're listening to this podcast, I'm assuming you're interested in staying on top of the latest trends, news, and more. So I want to tell you about another show. It's called Web3 with A16Z Crypto, but it's really about the future of the internet, future of creators, future of business, future of the way we work and live. It's for anyone seeking to understand the latest tech trends direct from experts with high insights per minute, given your time and attention are so valuable. Follow Web3 with A16Z in your podcast app now.
Have you ever tried to ask the internet a financial question?
Yes.
It's a really fun experience. I'm Ryan Graciano. I'm CTO and co-founder at Credit Karma, where I've been for a long time. We started in 2007. The internet doesn't know anything about you. The advice is very questionable. And if you want to do something like just a simple question like, hey, should I rent or buy a home? Which is one of the most common questions in finance. And you'll see a zillion Google results for this. It is painful how much you need to read to understand that. And when you start digging in, it needs to know things like, oh, well, what are your life goals and where are you going to live and like what areas? And so what is really interesting about that is AI is perfectly positioned to have these conversations with you. And especially because over time, it's learning about you. So it knows what your goals are. It knows where you live. It knows what your finances are. It doesn't need to ask all those questions, and it can direct you to the right, solutions and things to think about. So that's the AI as a guide that I think is desperately needed right now. I mean, if you look at how Gen Z and millennials use financial resources, 79% of them get their financial information from social media. Almost half basically use Reddit and YouTube. I've used Reddit Personal Finance. I'm not knocking it at all. It does a great thing for a lot of people, but it's rough. I mean, you have to write your life story on there, then ask the question. You're kind of like flirting with the idea of anonymity because no one wants to put their whole lives out there. And if you live in a small zip code, people can sort of start to figure out who you are. And then you get all sorts of answers. And some of the answers are from ideologues who are like, debt is terrible. You should never have debt. And others are like, leverage everything, and it's like, it's just sort of up to you to wade through it. And, I think that the AI of the future in finance is going to really help you hone in on what do you need to be doing. And from there, we can automate a lot of that, but that's for another question.
So when did you start using AI at Credit Karma?
We have been using AI for forever. I mean, since back in the late 2008 to 2010 range, it was, I say it was AI, but it was essentially a spreadsheet where we ran machine learning models. It was very sophisticated. But then we realized that that's just the center of our business, figuring out what are the products that people can get approved for, what is best for the consumer, how do we put that in front of them in a way that makes sense. And so, all of those are machine learning problems. So by 2010, we had started to build out a pretty sophisticated platform. And in the mid 20-teens, we were running billions of predictions a day. Nowadays, we do something like, I think it's like 65 billion predictions every single day. So machine learning is a really big deal for us. And we've centralized a lot of what we do. So we have kind of this one brain behind Credit Karma, and it powers the emails you receive, the push notifications you see, what you see when you come to the front door, the dashboard of the application. It's all that one system. So, your interaction with most places on the web is very episodic. Like you do a thing, you click an email, something happens, and then whatever brand you interacted with just forgets that ever happened. And so what is really interesting about Gen AI is it can carry on that context of that conversation through a lot of experiences on your property. And so what I would love to see in the future is we have this one sort of entity. I think of it as like the brain that is able to kind of carry on this interaction with you across, all aspects of your financial life. So when you're looking at your checking account, it hasn't forgotten. It just had a conversation with you about whether or not you want to rent versus buy. Those details are important. So we just launched our first generative AI experiences. We're in private beta. That came out in September. So we have credit coaching live now, which is really cool to see it work because this is a thing that we've done for many years, answer people's credit questions. And it's just better. It's just better at it than, our old system of how we develop product, which is, how people typically develop product is they think about the member problem and they kind of sit down and they map out this copy and then this flow and then this other flow, and you only can get to like 10 out of the 20 that you wanted to do and you stop. What's really cool about these experiences is it takes in that member context. So when you start a conversation with, our financial assistant, it's given the context of your situation. What's your credit score? What's your history look like? All that stuff. And then, it's able to look at like all kinds of capabilities on Credit Karma. And when you ask it a question, it can actually put together an experience that kind of makes sense for you in that moment. I tell a couple stories of, just experiences I've seen people throw together. And it sounds thrown together because it's like they spent, a day or 2 days just gathering a bunch of capabilities. And then they use the AI to essentially stitch the experience together. But that is dramatically different. It is hard for people to wrap their heads around that. And when I saw people starting to build AI experiences, they sit down with kind of like a very old software development paradigm, like what's the use case? Let's talk about the end-to-end flow of the use case. What are the errors? And I'm just like, no, that's not how this works anymore. We have to be thinking about like, what is the persona that the AI is taking on? How does the AI interact with you? What tools will it need to get its job done? It's in a lot of respects, it's more like training a person, like designing a person in a way, than it is designing software. And for people who have spent 20 years designing software, that's not so easy to do. And so, I'm really interested to see how companies solve these problems. I see Intuit's really leaning into it. I mean, they have this futures team that I think has done a bunch of interesting work on like, what does the future of software development look like? And they have some really cool internal prototypes for how people can actually kind of describe what they want and then see it get put together, which I think is really neat. I think there's going to be a bunch of companies that are kind of like when cloud started to become a thing, and same thing with mobile, we started talking about cloud native companies, mobile native companies. Well, the next gen is going to be AI native. They're not going to have built up all of this process and infrastructure. They're going to start with the AI design tools and start with the AI product tools. And so what I think is interesting is that the incumbents will have to really race to make sure that they are moving as fast as the little guys. But I'm seeing a very different approach than mobile. I thought when mobile came out, it was sort of like dragging boards along with you, that this mobile thing is real and not going away. I'm seeing the opposite with AI. I mean, the AI is like top down. Everyone realizes it's a huge deal. So there's a ton of appetite to go out and change all this stuff. So this time around, I feel like the incumbents are going to move a lot faster than they did in the mobile days. The hardest thing we're working on is, and I think this is going to be an industry-wide problem, there are all these different ways to use AI. There's like guide versus tool versus coach. They're totally different interaction paradigms. And people's mental image of AI is a chat box right now. That's what we all see, right? But that's not what where this is going. I mean, this is not going to be a chat box. It's going to be everywhere. It's going to be interactive push notifications. It's going to be stuff that's generated in the product. Generative AI is generative. It could generate UI, and those things are going to happen. So for me, the hardest thing right now is actually thinking about like not letting people get too anchored to that chat box and think about what member problem are we solving and how would we best solve that problem. And for some things like the guide, chat box works great. For other things, it really doesn't. Some of the tools just don't make sense in the box and they need to be better integrated throughout the whole product. But different people are good at those different things. What we've seen is that in the conversational design, in the chat box, it takes a certain kind of person who sort of can imagine how that conversation would flow to give it access to the tools that it needs, to prompt it in the right ways, to get the member to actually know what to ask, which is, we've discovered, a very big deal. People don't necessarily know what to ask. They don't wake up in the morning and are like, oh, I'm going to ask this financial question right now. Those things get prompted to them. That's why a lot of things happen on social media, because something jogs, their interest. And so what we have found out is that these different ways that people interact really matter. Different sorts of people are good at these different things. They're not necessarily your traditional product manager that just built the A to Z wizard flow. And so I think a lot of companies are going to be figuring this out. What does software development even look like in this era? In 2007, there were all these websites that charged money for your credit score. You might remember they're like dancing bands and $20 a month, and then blue text on a blue background that said, hey, when you cancel, we'll keep charging you. So we knew that industry wasn't going to be around forever. And we thought that the whole financial industry needed to see a lot of change. I mean, the way that you get financial products is very strange. I always draw the analogy to like buying shoes on Amazon. You don't go on Amazon and then it's like, hey, shoes between these two prices, and like you have to apply, and then you wait 3 days and maybe you get them or you don't. There's no reason that financial products can't be as transparent as shoe buying. And well, we started right before the big bust. I mean, 2008 was crazy. So we started as a website. There wasn't really a lot of mobile back then, and we were in a data center. So that's just kind of like putting you in the time. And our intention was to make financial products transparent, to essentially like have a model where we could buy this credit data, make it available to customers for free. That all blew up because banks started falling apart and crashing. So between 2007 and 2010, I'd say we were keeping the lights on by building product features that people liked and running really lean. And then in 2012, things started to come back. We had built a lot of stuff that people really liked, and we were able to actually connect that to the financial side of the business and create positive unit economics. So between then and now, a lot of stuff has happened. Mobile came along. We now have a majority of our 130 million people using mobile. What's interesting about AI is I think a lot of the incumbents are very advantaged because AI is essentially the intersection of data and capabilities in this brain in the background. And so the more capabilities you have, the more data you have, the better off you are. And so the question's kind of like not even just who does Credit Karma compete with, but who does Intuit compete with? Because Intuit is building a platform, where, now on Credit Karma, if you're a tax customer, our AI could potentially know, like, hey, you just did this on your tax return, or this is what your income is, and so on. That's valuable. That's the stuff that you type in Reddit personal finance when you're listing your life story to ask that rent versus buy question. So the number of competitors that have that kind of breadth of data, I don't think I could name one, but there's many that have like little pieces. There are like lots of content shops and companies that are doing like really specific things, like in spending or in, they try to answer the rent versus buy question with a form and a calculator, and they'll add AI to that stuff. But the problem is it needs to know a lot about you to be useful. Otherwise, it's like kind of the same experience that you had before. You still have to tell it everything. And what kind of permanence is it going to have is a big question, right? If you like touch it every 3 years, you have to redo that every 3 years. Answer all those questions again.
We'll be back right after this.
Hackers and cybercriminals have always held this kind of special fascination.
Obviously, I can't tell you too much about what I do. It's a game. Who's the best hacker? And I was like, well, this is child's play.
I'm Dina Temple-Raston, and on the Click Here podcast, you'll meet them and the people trying to stop them.
We're not afraid of the attack. We're afraid of the creativity and the intelligence of the human being behind it.
Click Here, stories about the people making and breaking our digital world.
AI machines. Satellite. Engine ignition.
Click Here.
And liftoff.
Every Tuesday, wherever you get your podcasts.
This show is produced by me and Anthony Green with help from Emma Cillekens. It's mixed by Garret Lang with original music from him and Jacob Gorski. Thanks for listening. I'm Jennifer Strong.